Tamara McMillen, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, very well. Thank you ever so much for giving us your time today.
It's my pleasure. I really am thrilled to be here talking to you today about something that I know is really important to both of us.
Yeah, and look, we've known each other a while now. We've seen each other on the sales circuit around various events, and I've been to some of your keynotes and round tables. I'm a big fan, and whenever the topic of anything in the workplace, at a senior level, in terms of big organizations comes up, then you were really at the top of the list, especially as we share a passion for health and well-being.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Absolute pleasure. My pleasure. Tamara, so let's start with give people an understanding of your career to date then, and what you've been up to.
Well, it's going to be obvious from my amazing accent that I am not British. I come from California. My career started in the Silicon Valley, really at the time that the internet became a force for driving business. So I've had the pleasure of really seeing how technology, the internet, can impact people both very positively and also in some really difficult and challenging ways in terms of barriers being removed and personal space being infringed on. I've worked in everything from telecom and IT services to IoT. I've worked in software, cloud, infrastructure, all kinds of different technology businesses. But for me, the most important thing in that has been the people that I've had the opportunity to work with and to lead. My career brought me to Europe in 2008. So I've been abroad now for a little while and here in the UK since 2012.
Some of those logos.
Some of those logos I was going to ask. So I worked for MCI, I worked for Verizon, Hitachi Data Systems, Virgin Media, Verizon's Digital Media Business, which was then part of AOL and Yahoo. And I'm currently an advisor to CSO UK, which, as you well know, provides thought leadership for the most senior sales leaders here in the UK and hopefully soon in other parts of the world.
I know the guys well there, yeah. In fact, that's how we met, wasn't it?
It is, yeah.
So you've had some big jobs. Is there any consistencies across all of these large organizations? Tough, I suppose. Yeah. It's a big ask.
Well, I think it's a really good question, to be fair. I mean, I've had the fortune of working in startups as well as Fortune 15 companies and in a few things in between. What they've all shared in common in the roles that I've done is they have all involved change, transformation, and taking people on a journey, helping them go from either good to great, helping them turn around from failure to success, helping them adopt new technologies, go through mergers, acquisitions, bankruptcy, quite a lot, deaths of leaders. I mean, I've worked in a lot of different environments where we've seen many different types of change. And whilst obviously I'm a sales leader, I focus on making sure that we can deliver the results. For me, it's always how we get there and how we help people achieve their personal best in doing that and getting them to believe in the journey that we need to go on and knowing that they're not doing it alone, but it's something that we're in together.
Let me ask you this, something that's just popped into my head. Over the years, has it changed? Has the sales field changed at all? With that, I mean, the way we communicate with technology and everything, but is it getting far more professional? I know, sales of previously was far more kind of gung-ho, and now it's got technical around tech packs and, we're all working internationally. How has it changed?
I'd say it's changed probably in three ways. One, it's become more professional from the standpoint of the skills are probably a little bit easier to define, largely because many of them do start to wrap around things like technologies, industry, expertise. So recognizing that knowing more about a few things can benefit organizations better than being jacks of all trade. So I think those have changed. I think how we interact with one another has changed quite a bit. It's always been a competitive sport, but I think we've probably become a little bit more collaborative in the fact that we share a lot. We've been put into more processes and procedures. Sales has become a lot more administrative, which is funny, isn't it? Because technologies were there to help remove some of the administrative burden, and yet we find ourselves still struggling and hating, as all good salespeople, I think, do, the amount of administration that is in our jobs. And the other thing that's changed about sales is the shift in the gut feel versus what we actually know, the balance between the art and the science. And I think, back in the day, it was all about the art of the deal. It was the art of the sale, and it was your ability to engage with the right people, and often, on the golf course or in other places that were sort of the acceptable place to do business. That's certainly shifted as well. So those would be some of the themes that I've noticed over the years that have changed. But it is still about doing business with people, establishing trust, having a positive competitive spirit, and really, I think, still focusing on the customer.
And I've just written down here dark art, because it did used to be a dark art. You couldn't actually measure it a lot of the time apart from just simply revenue. And it was a case of, well, I haven't seen him or her for weeks, but they've got a great number, so we'll just leave them alone and leave them to it. Now, of course, we're tracked every step of the way. Do you think there's a danger that we over micromanaging when you look at now every minute is being measured?
I think there could be. I actually think one of the challenges we have is that we don't use the data that we have available. And when we do use it, we're probably not taking insight from it. We're using it in quite a practical, straightforward, and binary way, sort of as a pass or fail. And you need it to pass, as opposed to trying to understand what we do, why we do it, and how we're getting it done. As far as pressure, I think where the pressure has come from, quarterly earnings results are really a product of kind of the 90s, and they're still not, to my knowledge, required. And yet it has created a different cadence for all salespeople, and a way that we start to then measure how we engage with our customers, and this very annualized view of projects that often take a very long time to implement. So I think that there are pressures that have come from greater insight, greater data, but all these tools, and I can see what you're doing. But it really depends if the data is even right, because otherwise all those perceptions and stresses are, they're ill-informed. And I think that's one of the key questions now, the more that we develop these tools and use machine learning, is, are we putting good data in? So are we getting great insight out? And then there's some amazing technology coming out there to help minimize what the salespeople have to do themselves, to where it can extract that data for us. And hopefully that will help ease some of the burden. Yeah,
it's interesting you say about data in, because I've never heard someone say that salesperson is so good. They've hit their number, and they're also cracking at admin.
It used to be like you could basically be a hated sales employee as long as you made your number. And I think now we've recognized that, sales, it is a team sport. It usually takes the collaboration of a lot of different people to bring something over the line. And so perhaps in that way we've become a bit better citizens of our workplace.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in. Look, so here's the big question. What makes a good sales leader?
I imagine different people will have different answers to that question. And I think, in fairness, there's probably a few different categories. The obvious one is that they need to have an understanding of what drives performance in their particular business, and what are those leading indicators so we can understand if we're going to perform. But I like to focus a little bit more on the leader part. And I think a great sales leader is someone who's adding value to their employees. I think that they're bringing in individuals and helping them perform at a higher level as they spend time there. I think it's someone who knows how to help someone leverage their strengths to build their weaknesses. I think it's someone who knows how to compliment and challenge people in an appropriate way. And I think it's all about helping people achieve their personal best. And to do that, you need to be close enough that you understand what they're good at. And you need to be courageous enough, I think, to help them get better. And a lot of times we don't, it gets difficult to make time for that. I think it has to really be a priority as a leader, that what you want to do is develop and grow and enhance your team. And I think when you do that, they naturally will absolutely perform. No question.
It's good, isn't it? Because sometimes when I look at sort of the late 90s, when I grew up in a estate agency, it's very easy to hire the same people as yourself. I remember some of the offices that we were in, whilst they were great fun, We were all exactly the same individuals. I think now I suppose, is like growing a team, isn't it? You can't have 9 strikers anymore, and one in midfield and the goalie. You've got to have people in all different areas of the pitch. Like you said about data, like you said about admin, and reporting and forecasting. It's far more technical nowadays.
It is more technical. I think it's also, the reality is teams are always in transition because people are starting and stopping at different times. They're leaving the business, they're changing roles, they're moving to other parts of the organization. And so I think we have to be quite agile as leaders to be able to meet people where they're at in that part of the journey of their development. And we also have to be quite thoughtful. You've heard me speak before, and of course, I'm an advocate of diversity and inclusion. And I think that we need to make sure that we're thinking about cognitive diversity. The point you made, we hire people that are like us. So how do we utilize tools, different resources, different methodologies to make sure that we actually are getting a variety of people across the landscape in our teams, because our customers are all different. They're all different, and because they involve human beings. And the best that we can do in relating to people is when we can see people that are like us, when we can think more similarly to people that are like us. So if everyone on our team looks the same, but all of our customers are different, there's likely going to be a subset of our customers at minimum that aren't going to be as well served as they could be. And so diverse teams, there's tons and tons of evidence as to why that makes sense. But
and now that everything is international at the click of a button, you've got EMEA, APAC, and everything else, which you can literally start up. It's so important to be culturally correct as well. You do need that breadth of learning, don't you, across the organization? Yeah,
you do.
Can a good salesperson, like your top salesperson, are they naturally good sales leaders?
No, I don't think so. I think that would be like saying, is your top baseball player going to be a great coach? I think it remains to be seen. I think what makes people great leaders and great coaches is that they care about the performance of the people on the team more than their own, that they recognize that their success is the collective of the success of the people that they have the fortune to lead and manage. And so some top salespeople are great leaders. They've not only figured out a formula for their own success, but they're passionate about helping other people be successful. And oftentimes in any job, I think we take the person who seems to have been doing the best and move them into the management role because usually of artificial boundaries, like we can't pay them anymore in their current job. They've hit that ceiling, and so we should promote them and put them in a new box. But I think it's really important that we find out what matters to an individual, and sometimes they're quite happy where they are. There's nothing wrong with that type of contentment. I imagine more of us might do better if we found our contented place and could grow within it, as opposed to feeling like we had to change just to grow.
Yeah, I agree. And look, we're both in sales, and I think a lot of people get addicted to sales. It's the thrill of the chase. It's the next deal. It seems to say so much about us, increases our self-esteem, gives us that buzz. It can come at a cost, or I think it has done over the years. And that's something we're both very passionate about, is balancing out in order to create sustainable sales careers, i.e. keeping people in a profession longer and healthier. We come across things in sales such as burnout, stress, anxiety, because you are literally only as good sometimes as your last month's figure or your last quarters, and you're completely trying to reinvent. It's an industry where you've got to keep your foot down all the time, unless, otherwise you're going backwards. Do you think sales industry has handled well-being well over the years? Do you think there are gaps, and do you think we're evolving slowly into looking after our sales teams more?
I'd say we probably have not handled it well, and hopefully we are doing better. And I'm going to say a couple of things that might sound a bit funny, but I guess if you look historically, sales has been predominantly male dominated. To this day, it still is, and certainly technology, leadership, sales roles, there aren't many women out there. And I think, in fairness, it's not been an open place for men to express their mental health needs and their stress. So I think within sales, that's probably been particularly poor. The other reality is that, I think we probably have so much more transactional sales going on now than perhaps we've had in the past, and things become quite simplified and self-service. So transactional sales is where I think a lot of the highest forms of stress exist, because it's exactly what you said. It might be my daily sales, my weekly sales, or my monthly sales. Whereas when you're in longer term strategic selling, you know, your risk is balanced out over time. You tend to have a better balance between your salary and your incentive. And so you can work over a longer period of time and across a variety of deals. And hopefully you've always got something closing, but it's not just about this month. It's far more the quarter and the year. So maybe it helps elongate some of that stress that's going to be there. I mean, sales is a stressful job. And I also think that we perhaps aren't doing as good of a job at finding people who have the right temperament for selling. So there's people that have the gift of the gab, or they seem like they could be great salespeople, but do they have the resilience? Because sales is far more about failure than it is about success. And, you know, I think that's something that we're trying to get better at, is mapping the kind of mindset that a person has with the sort of job that we're asking them to fulfill. I think it's very difficult if you don't have sort of a resilience for failure to manage the stress in a sales role. And that might be something that we need to pay a little bit more attention to, outside of just making it okay to admit that you're not okay. You know, that's hard. But again, I think we're seeing a little bit more of that, particularly in light of COVID-19. I think a lot more of ourselves have been revealed to our coworkers, and then maybe that'll help change the landscape as well.
And lots more being revealed, from our living rooms to our bedrooms, from wherever you have to seek solace in doing your video calls nowadays, when everyone's self-isolated. I've seen garden sheds. So why is it stressful?
Why is it stressful?
Sales, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant performance art, right? You know, and it's stressful because you don't get to control all the variables, and so if you don't make your number, you know, the company has to make quite clear decisions about meeting its number. I always marvel at how wonderful sales is, and I like to get, I'd say, a bit defensive for sales when you think that an average business probably has 8 to 15% of its employee base in sales. There are certainly other businesses that are different. You know, sometimes in recruitment firms, there's places where you have a lot of sales, but in general, it's a fairly small percentage of the overall employee population. And if we allow ourselves then to think, though, that that small subset of employees is actually providing the income of all of the other employees, including themselves, that's something that I always felt quite proud about. As far as the stress, I think it's just stressful because you are constantly being monitored and managed. Whereas if I work in other organizations, like let's say, you know, marketing or HR, with no respect to them, and it's not that they don't have KPIs, but they tend to be looked at on a longer basis. I think that stress comes up a little bit more semi-annually or annually or on a project basis. But with sales, it's sort of like, what'd you do today? What'd you do this week? and you know, if you can't answer that question confidently, I think it's very difficult to feel that you wouldn't feel stressed. We can alleviate that stress, though. I think that there's several things that we can do to help. One is, let's be sure that when we bring people on, that they really do know how to sell. There's a lot of assumptions that happen in selling. If you can walk up and show me a CV and you've sold before and you sound like a salesperson, you obviously can sell. I'm going to hire you. But how often do we skill assess our people and help find the gaps? Because perhaps they can sell, but maybe there were some really key skills that they weren't taught that we can give them that going to make them not just a good salesperson, but a great salesperson, or that's going to help prevent finding that failure point at a really critical moment in time, which could then turn into a great level of stress. We also can onboard them well, make sure that we give them all the types of resources, the support, the buddy systems, the check-ins. And the last piece that I really believe in is what I call positive performance planning. So, you know, everyone should have a positive performance plan, not on a PIP, right, when they fail to perform. But we should always be talking about performance. What are your personal financial goals? You know, what are the expectations the company has? Do you have what you need to get there? What am I willing to do? What are you willing to do? and then let's just meet up and have a chat and see how we're doing. I think if we did that more regularly as managers and leaders, we would help minimize the stress, because we would create a lot of transparency and authenticity in how we're doing. And we also need to tell people, it's okay if this, you know what, if it comes to it that this isn't your best job, I'm committed to helping you find the right role for you, either in our company or somewhere else, because you spend too much time at work to be unhappy and stressed, right? So we also need to be thoughtful of our individuals that way, because that's good for them and it's good for us.
And just to make this highly topical at the moment, bearing in mind for context, we're in the COVID-19. Do you think that when we're working remotely with all the technology that we might lose that ability to get close with our staff? Or do you think there may be some developments which actually make everyone more accessible?
I think it's probably going to be a bit of both. You know, I imagine that, I mean, I know CFOs who have worked at home for the first time and they dreaded it. And they have found it's actually pretty awesome. Like, I really like this. I actually could see myself doing this more often. And so they've had a positive epiphany. Others, you know, I think it's been very stressful. And it's also about personality types, right? Some people just don't do as well on the phone, or they don't like to be seen all the time. And other individuals think it's great. So I'd like to think that we're going to get more positively out of this experience. You know, definitely digital transformation has been accelerated, and many of those projects were really long overdue. And I think there's going to be better conversations around flexible working, which will help people with their mental health and their stress incredibly, because some people's long commutes put such an undue burden of stress on their ability to meet the rest of the needs of their life, their families, and, you know, their personal well-being. But I think we may see some different types of casualties as organizations perhaps overcorrect, and they don't recognize that there are employees that do need that interaction, that office space, as a means of building culture and community. So I think we have lots of development to go, and our opportunity would be to spend meaningful time reflecting after this period, or as we move into the next phase of this period, you know, asking our teams and individuals what's worked, what doesn't, how does that align with the broader culture of our business? How does that need to change, or what can we do to maintain it because we really liked the culture that we had? Those are some of the things that I think might be top of mind as we move forward.
Yeah, I think, well, I think, you know, we're in the midst of it now, but I think there's going to be a hangover. I really do. I think there's going to be, for a start, salespeople are people. That's why we kind of get into it. Now, I've actually really enjoyed working from home in this period. Got far more done from a production output, but it will be lovely to see colleagues and friends again. I do think that companies will have to justify that 2-hour commute to get to a meeting that could have quite easily be done over Zoom. So to justify the rent they're paying on their buildings for a time being. And I just think it's such an interesting time to reflect. I think those that act quickest will regret it. I think it is a period of communication with your team. You know, you've got to have intro interviews going back in. Otherwise, it's like we've all been on a 3-month summer break and no one's going to even talk about what we've done when we go back. And let's not forget that people, whatever leadership role they have, for the last 3 months, by the time anything happens, they've been the MD of their own environment. So they all go back that much more accomplished. Some may race back, by the way, but some go back with a fuller sense of responsibility that they don't want to relinquish when they go back to work straight away to someone else. It's going to be a really interesting time. I see flexi working becoming a norm, maybe going in the office 2-3 days a week, or at least justifying why you're in there.
Yeah, but it's interesting because those things work really well for existing employees. They also can work when you have a very young employee base. But I've also been in businesses when it's very difficult to onboard people remotely. It's hard to bring them into the culture and the community and the ways of working and the ethos that you have within the business, because a lot of times those are done not just in, you know, boardrooms and meeting rooms, but also at the pub. It's over a team lunch. It's in a team building exercise. There's a lot of different ways which we're going to have to think about how we achieve those things. So it will be really interesting. And I do agree with you. I think workers are going to be quite empowered.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting for employers to figure that out. And it will be a struggle. You know, you also mentioned very poignantly the sort of autonomy that someone has felt. But I also know people that are exhausted. They feel like they're on Zoom from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day. And that is almost worse in some ways for them. They just feel like they're constantly on, and they never get that 5-minute coffee break. It's just quite tough. And others who just don't have a conducive environment at home to work in. Like, you know, not everybody has a house with office space, or maybe they've got a lot of humans in their home, you know, at different ages. And so working at home might prove quite stressful for people there, you know, so it's going to be really, really fascinating. And I think it's going to be a 12 to 18 month journey. I don't think this is something we're going to sort out, you know, in the next few months. And furloughed employees, I think that they're in a particularly unique place. And I'm actually doing an ISM webinar on that, as I think you know. But, you know, furloughed employees, they've kind of been in like this time capsule spaceship thing where, well, COVID's happening and they know that because they're on furlough, but they're not really connected with their workplace. So they're not part of the change journey that's happening in terms of ways of working internally, ways of working with customers. You know, what are we saying now? How have we found ways to connect and get along and collaborate? They're going to be going in almost like somebody who's landed off a spaceship, like, oh, what is this like now? You know, and are we prepared to, you know, not just like re-interview them, but how do we onboard them and help them feel like they didn't really just miss out, because they experienced something just very different than the people who kept working.
Yeah. And I think because the sales environment is a lot more diverse now, shall I say, I know you alluded to that earlier, and we've got new gen coming through and new generations. Are they prepared to accept the same things that we started off? We loved about sales, I suppose, or you know, the game face, the stress, the pressure, or do you see it's changing that actually we did that and we got a financial reward from it, but now actually there are, we talked about going to the pub and stuff, and there was very much that booze, banter and burnout sort of
the three B's.
of the older year. But are people looking for more now from a career? I'm looking to try and find a way that it can become, in the same way that football, you know, they're not all drinking during the week anymore. It's becoming professional to sustain that higher level of performance. How do you see it changing?
Well, I think the younger generations for sure, and certainly some of us as well. But, you know, purpose is incredibly important. And there are a lot of, I mean, most businesses in the past 24 months have come out with their purpose and how they're purpose driven, not different to sort of the mission statements that preceded them. But I do think that they're quite keen on finding people that really live their purpose, and they know that they have a lot more options. And it's also quite interesting because the young folks right now that are coming out of university or who only have a few years work experience or on grad schemes, you know, they're going to be really impacted by the economy right now. So will that mean more of them will become entrepreneurs? Does that mean that, like has happened in the late 80s and other times in history, people have gone back to graduate school, so they actually become more educated, putting pressure on those of us who are less perhaps educated, right? Because now they've taken an opportunity to go and better themselves in a different way. So it's going to be interesting, I think, to see what they expect. But so I think they expect purpose. But I do think, you know, kind of going into the office, there's something a bit grown up about it. You know what I mean? And kind of getting to make mates at your work. There's something about that it's just that next chapter of life. But they've figured out how to date and get married and start businesses and do everything from the comfort of their bedroom. So I'm really confident if anybody can figure it out, it's going to be them, and they'll help redefine what it looks like. And that's exciting to me.
Yeah, and it will be the new normal because we haven't got it yet. So it'll be whatever it will be, isn't it, really? You made such a good point about culture. I know in companies that I've worked that have had a strong culture and that do still have a strong culture, that's being got from being in the office and being able to really touch and feel the organization, I suppose. But look, we're going on to well-being, and I know this is close to your heart. Have you always been into health, fitness, and well-being?
I think it's been a journey in some ways. I mean, sport was a big thing in my household, probably a bit more on television than in practice, but my dad played baseball when I was little. My brother played baseball, so I grew up a tomboy. And, you know, I could throw a mean American football spiral. I could play golf and baseball left-handed and right-handed because I'm left-handed, but we only had right-handed equipment. So I think I always had a passion for sort of being strong and putting myself out there. And I think the well-being came in a little bit later. I had personal experiences in my life. My mother had a stroke when she was very young. She survived, but obviously that, you know, that creates brain damage and other things that you then have to sort of learn how to survive and how do you become resilient. And a lot of that is around your own well-being. And, you know, discovering that I was really good at working, but I wasn't very good at balance. You know, and balance wasn't just, you know, exercising, but it was having hobbies that I invested in. I just really loved work and learning, and I had to learn a bit how to apply that to other parts of my life. So I've always been passionate about enjoying life. I think I learned over time how important my well-being is to ensure that I'm able to really do that in the best way possible, and also to provide for the other people in my life. And we've all heard it used before, but it's such a great analogy, the airplane and the oxygen mask that comes down. You know, well-being is making sure that you put your own mask on first, because you can't care for the other people in your life or really tend to the things in your life when you're not caring for yourself. It's not selfish. It's actually how we love other people, by taking care of ourselves first and loving ourselves. So it's something that I am really passionate about, and I continue to learn about, and I really want to make sure that the people that I have the pleasure of working with, and certainly that I have leadership responsibility for, know that their whole life is important, not just their work life.
Yeah, well put. I mean, there is an evolution of well-being now, and you've summed it up with saying it's not just fitness. What is your definition of well-being then?
My definition of well-being, I actually had to think of this. I'm going to look here because I wrote some interesting things down. I thought I'm probably not going to find them now. What is my definition of well-being?
Well, you take your time. It differs with everyone.
Yeah, I really do think that it is caring for yourself and really prioritizing yourself, you know, and making sure that in whatever ways you get enjoyment, you know, if it's cooking, if it's some form of exercise, if it's, you know, you go to the wine bar with your friends every couple of weeks, like there needs to be something that you do just for yourself. To me, that's what well-being is. It's caring for yourself, not as important as all the other things that we care for. And I do think that this is hard for women, a little bit harder for women, especially when you have more responsibilities in terms of if you have a family or other things, because it's in our nature to try and, you know, generally, obviously using grand generalizations here, but it's sort of in our nature to feel responsible even when nobody tells you, for all of these other humans and lots of other things in life. And we can not be very good at asking for help. And that means we deprioritize ourselves, you know. So I mean, I've had realizations over the years, moments I've stood in the kitchen frustrated, doing dishes, making dinner, and looking at the laundry pile, and then realizing how much and to what extent had I done it to myself. You know, how much had I failed to either make sure I had the kids do that, or I asked someone, could you just empty the dishwasher? Because it wasn't like somebody wasn't willing to help. Sometimes we just forget to ask. So I think well-being is valuing yourself and, you know, just, and really dialoguing with yourself, reflecting. I'm a big fan of reflection and thinking about what you want, you know, what do you want in this life? We only get one. So
Pizza's ready.
Pizza's ready. So what are you going to do with it, you know?
Look, I mean, we're very frank people. Have you ever had a time in your life when, you know, your back's against the wall and you've had to become resilient? Have Have you ever had signs that you're not prioritizing your own well-being?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use a really recent one. My son got quite sick in January of 2018, and it was really fortunate. I wasn't working at the time, so I was able to be around, but it was a really very, very time consuming, and it went on for quite a long time, and there's still part of that journey that we're on now. But, you know, I threw myself so much into that care that I stopped. You know, I do like to work out. I never was going to the gym. You know, I just wasn't prioritizing eating as well as I like, which, you know, that becomes, it's just sort of self-fulfilling. You're not exercising, and so then you're not feeling as good about yourself, and you just don't care for yourself. And I think it was fine for a while, but then you know, you start to notice things like your attitude and behavior toward others, level of physical exhaustion, how well you're not resting and sleeping, and then also just your opinion of yourself really starts to change. You know, that inner critic becomes way louder than the inner coach. And you know, those are signs that's not going well. And I was working to give my son like full support with his illness. It affected school and a bunch of other things. And I'd had a therapist at another time in my life. And, you know, I finally got to this point where I thought, I need somebody to talk to about all this stuff, because it's so stressful. And I feel like I have myself and my partner, who's wonderful, but like, we're already in it together. You know, I needed that outside voice and someone that I could sort of dump and vent to. And so for me, it was really important to find an external person that wasn't involved to have that conversation with. And then the other thing was just starting to exercise again, and just doing it in bite-sized chunks, whether it was the 15-minute walk with the dog, or, you know, ultimately, you know, I have a Peloton bike, which I love. You know,
Yeah,
I had it for like 10 months before I really rode it. I mean, I was riding it here and there, but I hadn't really, you know, taken advantage of this incredible piece of equipment and all these classes that I had access to. You know, so it was, you know, sort of those moments where you go, I just can't keep doing this. I have to change something. And I knew that I'd done it before, and I just had to kind of call on that. It was really be more important to myself. And
Well,
nobody's going to be mad at me, by the way. That's, you know, we convince ourselves sometimes that, like, how are they going to all get by without me? It's like, yeah, they manage. That 30 minutes you squeaked out for a bike ride there, everybody was fine. Nothing happened, you know?
and do you know what? You got a bit down, you were exhausted, everything else, you had to prioritize yourself. So you've completed stage one. Well done, Tamara, you're normal. And and you know what? It's the same as everyone. Why do we find ourselves sometimes, not all the time, but in an industry where, with the game face that you've got to put on in sales, you've got to have that heightened level of performance. So like you alluded to, when people can go in other, so we say, parts of the business, and they don't necessarily have to perform right at the top of the game all day. The goal for the salesperson is, if you're down, and everyone gets down, so we're all normal, good. There's the sort of average benchmark, but we've got to be up here. So the gulf between the two is like a performing seal sometimes. And do you know what? It's exhausting to keep putting that face on. I think that's what.
And also, there's no one that can take the burden, right? So like, there, you know, not to say, oh, sales just has it worse, but, you know, there are jobs where it's easier to shift the workload to others if you need a bit of a break. But, you know, in quota-bearing worlds, you can't shift it. There's no one to give it to. And I think that certainly makes sales quite a stressful job when the rest of life starts not happening so smoothly, because you're the only one that can make those deals happen. And that is a difficult pressure, and why we do need to figure out, in a commercial way, how do we support well-being during those times, because there's a direct correlation between whether I perform and whether I get paid, you know, to the standard that I'm used to afford the life that I've built, right?
Yes. And if we accept that it's stressful, look, we love sales. No one's knocking sales. We love it. But if we accept that it's stressful, and we accept that we are humans, which most of us are, when are we going to normalize the conversation around mental health and well-being? When are we going to realize that we all, if you're a human with blood going through you and air into your lungs, you have emotions. You're going to have ups and downs. You're going to get exhausted once you've had a huge week and the thing you've been working towards says no at the end, and all that work was for no avail. When are we going to normalize the conversation around well-being and mental health?
Yeah, if I had that answer, I probably wouldn't be on this podcast. I'd be off on a ship somewhere, I think. But,
I'm coming.
you know, I think it is such a tough answer because, look, there are realities of running a business, right? Like, we do need to be more in tune with employees. If our employees don't have great well-being, they're not going to be productive anyway. But there is also a balance point sometimes where we go, well, what do we do? Because if in sales you have loads of people off, or you're taking concessions to account for the fact that they do have these very real needs, how does that gap get filled? And some of this is around whatever those commercial models that exist within businesses, they don't necessarily align to allow perhaps some of the other things we might need to do in the area of well-being. So I think it's something we're going to have to continue to think about. You know, how do we manage that? In certain places, you know, I come from California, and I've been gone a long time, so I don't know to what extent the laws have changed, but I can tell you that, you know, if an employee went on stress leave, there were so many limitations of what you could do to replace them, which in many ways is fair. Employee should have a job to come back to, but then at the same time there was no way to make up for that performance, and you couldn't get, you know, temporary headcount or anything in. So it starts to then affect lots of other people and their well-being, and because of the actual model of how sales works. So I think in sales it is tricky, and I certainly would love the answer if you've got it.
No, I haven't. No. It's very interesting to hear you talk about, because when organizations are on a bigger scale, obviously the problem and the consequences are magnified. I mean, I'd like to say, whose job is it to instill a culture of well-being and everything else? But I suppose I know what you're saying. You're saying there is an effect on the bottom line with all this, isn't it? And well-being is still regarded by many as meditation and, you know, sitting there cross-legged or fluffy slippers and a bowl of fruit. And so I'm not blaming them for thinking that way, that why would we do all that? You know, we've got targets to hit, revenues to hit, bills to pay, and we want to expand and grow. So maybe it's an education piece. Maybe it's an education piece on the bottom line.
I mean, I don't know, maybe it's probably a combination of things. You know, it's policies, practices, culture. I think a lot of it is the examples you get from leadership, and, you know, how do we create more flexibility to meet the needs of the business, you know, whilst caring for our employees, because you don't have a business if you don't have employees. You know, and I think, much like inclusion, I don't think it takes, you know, it might sound like I'm contradicting myself here. I think that there are some real commercial realities that we have to struggle with and figure out. But there are other ways in which well-being for employees, I think, can be quite simple. And I'm not talking about yoga at noon, which, by the way, nobody ever has time to attend.
That's right, yeah.
But I think sometimes it's just acknowledging to a person that you know they're having a tough time, giving them an extra hour, you know, giving them a couple of days off that might not be in their remit. You know, sometimes it's those small concessions that we can make that can be enough to fuel a person, or to give them the time and space they need to think, or to get some extra support. And that's probably where we could all just lean in a little bit better, and demonstrate our vulnerability, and hope that our employees will do the same. But some of it is just how people are. You know, some people are very private. Some people are also just, you know, understandably, they don't really know if that vulnerability will somehow ultimately come back to haunt them in how they're rated in their job. I mean, well, it's a reality, right? Because if we can't get unconscious bias out of the hiring process, are we really going to be able to get those biases that may be forming in the backs of our minds about the strengths and weaknesses of the person when they become more vulnerable to us?
Well, this is what I likened it to. Reporting mental health at work is like asking your mother-in-law to do your marriage guidance counselling. You know they're there to help. You know they've got good intentions, but you also know that they're writing down everything and might come back to bite you at some point. So So yeah, I think it needs to be a third party, something third party, because I don't think anyone really does trust until you get to that red flag right at the end when you're just, you're having a breakdown, you can't do anything. By then it's way too late. I mean, I have some sympathy for senior leaders, and you hang out with these senior leaders. That's your gang, and you're at the top. It'd be easy to go and beat them all around the head with, you should do more of well-being now, we're all humans and everything else. But how many senior leaders can go into a shareholders meeting with investors and bring out a well-being policy, slap it on the table and say, right, there you go. That's what I'm reporting this month. I mean, we have to balance this up to make it authentic, don't we?
We do, but I do think that the situation that we're in right now will be changing the conversation at the boardroom. I mean, the reality is obviously there are investors that want to be satisfied whether you're a privately held company or publicly traded, but it is something that everyone is collectively facing. So perhaps it will bring us all into a common understanding that won't change the fact that if someone makes an investment, they're going to expect a return. But does it buy us the opportunity to be a bit more patient about how quickly we get those returns? Or does it help us to become more creative in how we structure businesses? One of the things I'm curious about is if you go back to an organization after furlough period is over, and instead of 100 salespeople, we can only afford to employ 50. We know that those decisions are going to be largely made on recent performance, right? Which is seemingly the most appropriate way. However, what could we do for those other 50 employees? So for example, could we make them contractors and say, look, we can't give you a salary, but we'll give you a patch to still try and sell to, and we can create some sort of compensation model, because if you're actually driving those deals, then we can still pay you in some way. I mean, why couldn't that work? You heard it here first. I mean, but why couldn't that work? Would that be an option? Because it would be better than not having a job. And you, by the way, already know the products, already know the services, already know the customers or the prospects of the target market. I mean, is that a way to continue to utilize people? I think we need to, they're incredibly smart, savvy business people out there. We just have to put our heads together and think collectively, because every person feels better when they're being productive. Every person feels better when they're able to provide for themselves, or make a contribution, meet their obligations, have a jolly, go off on a holiday, have a drink at the pub. I mean, that's what makes people feel better. And when they feel better, they work better. Full stop.
Yes, which will then have an effect on the bottom line. And when we come out of all this, we don't have to just alter old habits. We can make a new, can't we? Because I mean, that's what may be the real positive about this. We don't have to just change. It's changed. It's over. It's stopped. There'll be, obviously, culture and performance are still going to be driving organizations. But like you've just said about that model, the clever businesses will be readjusting now to figure out how they can work flexibly into the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you're incredibly passionate about diversity and inclusion as well. So are there any differences between the genders in this well-being conversation that we're having?
Well, sure, because there's so many differences in genders, aren't there? We alluded to one earlier, that I think that there's not been as much space for men in the workplace to admit their stresses. There's, an expectation on their bravado, I think, that they need to maintain, which has been tougher for men. And likewise, I think for women, particularly if they do have children, I think, talking about home life just feels like people are going to start judging you and thinking that you can't handle it. So there are differences in how perhaps we get perceived and judged, and differences in our ability to talk about things and who we talk about them with. But I think we all feel a very similar risk at the end of the day. I mean, women are classified as emotional, so generally we're supposed to talk about things more often. But, to what extent are we playing a game face as well? Because we can't say too much, I mean, I've had the funniest conversations at different times. I remember one day, I love to cook and I love to bake. And I remember I brought something baked into work, and my boss looked at me and he goes, "Did you buy those?" And I'm like, "No, I ate them." And he goes, "You bake?" I'm like, "Yeah." He clearly had this hardcore corporate woman who just orders out all the time. I mean, I don't know what he thought, but But it was so funny because it never occurred to me that someone would have, like there was a clear perception about whether or not I had homemaking skills. I thought that was so weird, and then, well, now how did he think of me differently? Because I love to bake cookies and biscuits and whatever. So weird. It's just bizarre, some of the stuff. So anyway, well-being is tough, I think. And the other thing that comes into play between men and women in well-being is who's the boss.
What do you mean?
So if I'm a male reporting to a male, will I feel more comfortable revealing some of my well-being needs versus if I report to a woman? Or might it be actually the opposite?
Well, you got me thinking now.
And how could we think about that in the workplace? Because normally everything is very hierarchical. Like when you have a problem, you go to your line manager, maybe you go to HR, but that's always, I think there's probably less trust with HR than there is with your own line manager. So sorry, HR, I love HR, but I just think sometimes that's the case, right? They don't know.
Let's get real. If we're going to solve this, we've got to have real conversations. Yeah,
exactly. So, it could be really curious to start thinking about knowing our employees better, and just at a personal level that said, hey, instead of just giving them their line manager to talk to, maybe you give them a person of another gender or another nationality or their same nationality or something like that, where you go, hey, you can come to me, or you've got a second person. It's kind of, most of us have friends that are so close, they're like aunties and uncles to our children, and I always tell my kids, if you can't talk to me, you can go and talk to this person. There's somebody that I trust that you should be able to trust, because maybe you won't want to talk to me sometime, and I want you to have a safe person to trust, not just your friend who doesn't know any more than you. And so I think at work, maybe we need to create kind of those aunties and uncles, those other safe places where people can go and get their needs met, almost like a bit of well-being mentoring or something. Because I don't think we have the answer, but if we do a lot of experimenting, I think we're going to come across some good things.
Well, what I'm just thinking about from my own experience and from experiences of others who have had their trials and tribulations in life, because they're normal, when it does happen, it's not so much the people that they hang around with all the time necessarily at work that they may broach that subject to. You're exactly right. All their line, because they know the game face. So to let them do that, you'd have to unravel your whole game face and then tell them you bake cookies in your example. And then you're worried about building up your game face again afterwards. You're far more likely to, in my case, tell a stranger, or if someone else comes in from the side and just broaches a conversation because they're on a similar level, or emotionally to you at that time, it makes you want to open up. Whereas I would fear how long it's going to take to get my rep back, or image, or all these other silly things we worry about after the conversation.
You're right that we do all have game faces, and I talk to a lot of young girls and women. And you can, some men, you can see them, they're walking in, I'm attractive, I'm fashionable, and I'm going to get this job done, and I'm going to, you can just see they're like a whole package of, they're a force walking in. And I think that's wonderful. But at the same time, like, you can probably just relax. Like, you're still going to be all those things, you don't have to sort of barge in and feel that way. And it's a terrible feeling to feel like you have to do that. But a lot of times we do feel like we have to do that. We feel very much like we have to prove ourselves above and beyond what anyone else is probably expecting, but we kind of walk in with that. And it's that face that you're talking about, that if we let that down, then what?
And we may feel, as in senior leadership as well, that some women try to act more like the male counterparts that are around them and sort of grow into that mold, which is equally as, I suppose, why do that? Why aren't we all just taking on our own merit? Have you seen any of that happen? Yeah,
I think a lot of it. Certainly when I went into the work world, it was, cut your hair short, where, definitely golf, and basically be a man's version of a female. And I'm like, never going to happen. Good on you. That's just ridiculous. Sorry, no. But I do think that there is still some of that conformity that everyone feels. I do like to recognize that I don't think some of these things are gender issues. I think that everyone feels them, but they experience them differently. and in different ways, because I also knew a bunch of guys that didn't golf, and they just struggled, you know, because they really felt like they needed to golf. And I'm like, dude, if you don't golf, don't golf.
Oh, the pressures we put ourselves under.
Yeah. And I thought, you know what? I am not going to wear pantsuits. Sorry. And if my dress is form fitting, maybe that looks better on me than something else, you know? I mean, and if I was dressed frumpy, by the way, you'd criticize me for that. So frankly, it doesn't matter what I'm wearing, or if my hair is short or my hair is long. I mean, people will pick on what they want to pick on. So I think you just got to like forget about it. It's not easy, but I think we really have to try and bring our whole self to work and try to worry less about what others think and worry more about what we think of ourselves. Because at the end of the day, the only person you really have to look in the mirror and answer to is you.
Do you know what? That's closer to my own definition of well-being, when you just do whatever feels right for you, because it can be exhausting to try and be anything yourself. You can't express yourself. I think, yeah. So well-being for me is just that ability to express yourself.
Yeah.
To be you, to know that whatever you're feeling at the time is okay because you're feeling it. You don't have to second guess and justify everything. And you talked about the inner critic before. Mm. How loud has that been for you over the years? Because the inner critic was my worst enemy. I related it to a bully in my head that it just got nauseous over time. And I needed to prove that it was wrong, that what it was telling me could be proved wrong in order for me not to have to listen to it.
Yeah.
How's your inner critic been?
You're evidencing things is real. And I mean, I think every time I've gotten a promotion, it's been really loud, you know, a bit of that imposter syndrome. And it comes definitely at different times. I think in different exposures, when you risk something new, I think the critic tends to enjoy those moments the most. And I think we have to all work hard at keeping facts in the conversation with ourselves. And there are days when that's easier and days when that's harder. When I am, you know, taking care of myself, when I'm exercising regularly, because for me, that's something that's one of my good self-care things. You know, when I'm spending time with the people that I enjoy, I'm making that balance and not just feeling like I'm on like the treadmill of life, then I find that I can manage the critic better. But the further I get away from taking care of myself, the louder the critic becomes, because it's sort of like that one failure to care for myself becomes all of my failures and all of my inadequacies. So yeah, it is tough. And we all have them. And that definitely, I think, is an area at work that's very tough. You know, you're in a job and people expect you have a certain set of skills that they probably didn't even ask you about. And when you feel like you might be lacking one that someone's expecting, the ability to be honest about those things doesn't exist, you know? And I think those are the areas where we could all do such a better job at just letting people go, yeah, I didn't learn that thing, you know? That wasn't, somehow I've gotten here and I don't know that. But I can learn it.
When people start new jobs, I mean, that horror, you have the first few days where this is great, I'm breezing through this, nothing's expected of me, I've got no targets, all I've got to do is find out where the kettle is and talk to HR. And then you have that period of, I'm sitting next to someone who's very good at their job and they seem to know fluently what they're doing, and I feel an absolute imbecile. Why have they even hired me? I can't do this. And what we should be saying is, you know, chill out and just let's get something in the calendar and learn how to do it incrementally. But we don't. We go straight to self-assassination.
I think some of that comes back to what we talked about a bit earlier around, you know, positive performance planning with people. How do we onboard them? Because normally it's you have 90 days, 6 months, whatever, to prove yourself. So you are already under the gun. You know, it's sort of like, you're here now. Yeah. What are you going to do? You know?
Let's hope you didn't lie in your interview.
Yeah, exactly. Smoking beers.
Yeah.
I mean, but what if, you know, we approached it differently? And this is a challenge to myself as well, right? What if we approached it that these 6 months are for us to prove you made the right decision? These are all the tasks, the trainings, the learnings that we're going to do to make sure you have what you need to be successful. Of course, they do still have to show up and perform, but how we choose to engage in that conversation, I think can make all the difference. And and, you know, many people have heard me say it many times, you know, my disappointment with the fact that when we hire people, they were the most qualified, best person for the job on that day at that time. They beat everybody else out. They stood the test, and we picked them. Now, why is it often in such a short period of time they become the worst employee, the one we're not sure that was the right hire? Were they lying, or did we fail them? Like, where is that accountability to the people that we bring in to make sure that they're as successful as we clearly thought they were?
Such a good point. When I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of all the people, you know, when they come on board and you say, oh, they were so good in their interview. What? And they're not now on day 3. I mean, of course, they don't know the role. It's our job to teach them.
Yeah. I had a gentleman that I managed once, and he had a team, and it was having quite a lot of turnover. And he was, as a result, of course, he wasn't performing very well. And I wanted to have a chat, and I'm like, hey, you know, what's going on? Like, what's happening in the team, you know? And it was a lot of, well, they're just not very good, and this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, well, hang on a second, you know, you've hired some of these people, but they're not very good. I used my same, how did the best person become the worst person? And we figured a couple things out. You know, one, he wasn't very good at interviewing. So maybe he wasn't able to identify the right candidates. Well, those are skills that we can give him. 2, he wasn't committed to successfully onboarding them, making sure that they had tools, the resources, the buddy, the whatever they needed, so that they could actually deliver on the job. So no wonder they were failing. But you know what? I don't think anybody had helped him figure out a process. So he just hired people and kind of, I think, thought that it would take care of itself. It was like very Darwinian, you know, the survival of the fittest. But that's what happens far too often in sales. And it's a shame because it's expensive to hire and bring people in. It's a huge loss of productivity. But moreover, it's crushing to those humans. Crushing. And we can do better than that.
We can, and we will. And I honestly think it's changing. I think leaders are changing. I'd see more and more the keynote speakers are doing more about the well-being. And like you say, it affects the bottom line. A team that is performing better will produce more. Now, when we talk about leaders, I'm taking up a lot of your time. So I've got a couple of questions left, but this one's a biggie. Top senior sales leaders, can you be authentic in your messaging about well-being and mental health? And I'll give some context. Do you have to be guarded about your own brand and image, bearing in mind people like strong leaders? What is strong? How is that regarded now?
Yeah, that's a lot of, it's a few different really good questions about authenticity in there. I think that every person can be authentic, no matter what your job title or role is. I mean, I think that is about how much you choose to let people see you. I do believe that everyone recognizes, and I've had this feedback myself, sometimes you don't know that we're not appearing authentic. You know, we may not even be consciously aware of some of the barriers that we have up, and not because we're not interested in being authentic, open, vulnerable, but perhaps we're just sort of easily in the performance art, and it just happens. So how you can create those opportunities. And I think it is really important for leaders to be honest about their well-being and their challenges and their vulnerabilities. I do think it can be tricky sometimes to find the right time and the right place, because humans themselves are all vulnerable. And there is something about leaders that, and the strength that we feel that they have, and the answers we feel that they have, and the confidence that we place in them, that I think we have to recognize can be impacted when we demonstrate our vulnerabilities. So I think it's probably a very standard, when you talk about those things, you also show how you survive them, how you've been resilient, how you can move beyond it, even if it's still hard, and showing them that there is strength in weakness. That's the important part. So it's not just about, my life sucks and I've got some really crappy things. It's sort of, how am I using that, and also where do the organizations support me? Where if I, and how can I use this as a message to let you know that if you're in a similar place, the organization can be here for you as well. obviously the more that the values of your company and the culture of your company align to being authentic, the easier it is for authenticity to be seen, because we've also probably all experienced people who seem very open about sharing their life challenges. But it can feel sometimes like posturing as well, right? It can feel like an advertisement for, I want to be seen this way. So I think authenticity is probably more about the quiet moments and the side conversations than it is about sort of main staging the realities of your life and hoping that everyone will see you as very genuine. I think it comes from the small everyday things that we do for people. Remembering their name, remembering that if they did tell you something personal, that you ask about it, the next time. And if you can't remember all the details, you can say that too. I think it's that kind of humility that makes leaders endeared to the people that they have the pleasure and honor of leading. Just be real. I mean, are you supposed to remember 5,000 employees' names? I mean, come on, it's not that easy, and for some of us, it's harder than others. But, you can remember things about them, and it's also about doing what you say you'll do. Be the person of your word. If you tell people, if you have email me, we see these kinds of things. Reach out to me, let me know. Yeah, and then they never answer, right? I mean, I think those are authentic moments that do more damage than good, because they weren't authentic. They were convenient, and they might have even been heartfelt, but unless you sort of do what you say you're going to do, people won't trust you.
I'm just writing this down because I never expected to get such a thorough, I never expected to get such a full answer. I thought we were going to go into discussion. I love your term main staging. So I've noted that one, and sidelining. So yeah, you're right. It's actions speak louder than words on this one. If you're main staging and talking about it, you better have a good game to back that up, because you're promising a lot. But actually, like we all know, it's the sideline conversations. I love that, and the moments that deliver your authenticity, not just show it. So I suppose,
and it's this emotional intelligence as well. I've had employees be kind enough to tell me that, maybe they had a partner suffering with cancer or different things like that. And you could tell that it wasn't something they really wanted to talk about. And it wasn't because they felt vulnerable. It was because work was a place for them to forget about it.
yes.
So it's also about finding the balance of showing enough care. So on occasion saying, hey, hope you don't mind me asking, how are things going with your partner? But also respecting that work might be their escape. So this is where I think it's not just well-being and authenticity. It is that emotional intelligence and trying to connect well enough with people. And if you're in a role or a position or a personality that's more difficult, then find another way to do it, because that's inauthentic too. If all of a sudden you're really asking a lot of personal questions and that's not generally your thing, that will be hard to maybe maintain. So ask about the things, if they like sports, ask about that, because you can connect on a different level. It doesn't always have to be this like really emotional, heartfelt stuff. It can just be things that matter to other people. On inclusion, one of my favorite things to tell people, and this isn't, and maybe this is about being authentic, but we talk a lot about inclusion. One of the ways I thought it was so easy to show inclusion at work, don't just buy men's cut t-shirts with the brand on it, because no girl looks good in that. Okay? No one. No girls, but nobody. Okay, there's the odd person. Nobody looks good in that. How hard is it to order 2 different size things or 2 different types of things? Or just acknowledge that there's different types of people in your organization. I know it's a bit more costly, or it might be a bit more cumbersome, but actually it's those tiny, silly things that often make people feel really included. I mean, it's somebody thought of me. Everybody can do that. Everyone can be thoughtful.
It's a bit of thought, isn't it?
It's just not that hard. No.
I think what we've established with this, I've thoroughly enjoyed, we've gone well over an hour. I think you and I could talk. No, it's me. I think you and I could talk about this subject for a while. I think what we've got is that we've both got a passion for the physical side, for fitness and well-being. And really, I think the cross purpose here is to stress, just be normal, isn't it? I mean, that's what seems to have have come out. Let's not try and be anything that we're not, because if everyone's being themselves and performing in their right and correct role that they feel happiest at, and in an environment which they are most productive, then that's better for everyone.
Definitely. And I think it's when people will achieve their personal best, they'll feel valued. And I think also, you know, people aren't going to stay forever, right? I mean, it's not even good for them. They should move on and do other things. How great would it be if we created just legacies of happy employees who loved working for our brand and are going to continue to be advocates, but they're going to take everything that they've learned during their time with us and go do great things somewhere else. I mean, I don't know, I think that's about the best thing you could do for a person.
Yeah. Well, it's no surprise that you've been a terrific leader. So I hear everything that you say. I've been making notes furiously, and myself, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So I know you're on LinkedIn if anyone wants to reach out to you. Definitely.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the chat. And I imagine everyone listening to this values this conversation, values people, and hopefully taking care of themselves so they can help continue to spread the good news. And it will make a difference, because every person that cares about this topic will make it that way. It becomes part of the conversation, and that's what we need. You know, take it out of the darkness and bring it into the light. Normalize it, because that's what being normal is.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it, and we'll upload this to the Wellity platform so that others can get to hear your opinion and be more normal in their approach to their own well-being and of others. Tamara, thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Take care.
I'll speak to you soon.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.